OCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
All right, 6 minutes after 10 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. When I was a kid, I'm going to show my age here, Robin.
Okay.
I really liked Simon and Garfunkel. Mm-hmm. and they had a song. They didn't write it. I had to look it up. It's Ed McCurdy is who we want to credit with the writing of the song. Anyway, it was also made popular, I guess, by Pete Seeger. And just mentioning Pete Seeger and Simon and Garfunkel tells you that I'm not young. But anyway, the song is called Last Night I Had the Strangest Dream. And the first couple of lines in the song are, Last night I had the strangest dream I ever dreamed before. I dreamed the world had all agreed to put an end to war. And, you know, when you were young, when I was young at that point, there was a war going on, a Vietnam War. It seems like there's always a war going on of some sort, right? Mm-hmm. And it seems like it's always the young people. I don't know how old Ed McCurdy was when he wrote that song, but I know Simon and Garfunkel were young at that time. Pete Seeger probably was young when he recorded it. And it is the young people that see the mistakes in this world and try to, they question things. They say, why? Why do we do this? Why don't we fix this? And you see it right now with the kids who are worried about schools. Mm-hmm. You see the kids. You may not agree with their solutions, but the point is they're making a statement, and we all have to sit back and say, okay, yeah, there is a problem. What can we do to fix this problem? And this is the case of human history, right? We've been this way, and some things we've evolved and become better at, and other things we still have a way to go. One of the things that is maybe at the halfway point, or I'd like to be more optimistic, maybe the 80% point, is you ladies. You ladies have not always been treated fairly in America. Hopefully we're getting better and better at this. But it is, again, because of young people who are stepping forward and saying, hey, you know, that wasn't exactly right. The whole Me Too movement. Who was it? Who would they credit with that with? I know it wasn't the movie actress, but anyway, I'm sure somebody out there knows. But the point is that we have to pay attention. If we don't pay attention, then we don't evolve as a species. The important part is to remember where we came from. And so when you have somebody who puts together an amazing book that helps you understand the history of any of these movements, whether it's keeping the earth clean, mm-hmm. or having equal rights for all the races and equal rights for women.
Equal rights for dads who are divorcing, and we need that too.
Right, everybody. Right, exactly. Everybody should have equal rights. So right now I wanted to focus on the women. The book I'm holding is wonderfully done. It's called The Feminist Revolution, The Struggle for Women's Liberation. Bonnie J. Morris is the author of the book. She taught women's history for 22 years at George Washington University and at Georgetown University. Did you say she's in California?
Yes. So I don't know what city.
So she's up early to talk to us.
She's exciting.
So let's say good morning to her. Bonnie Morris. Good morning, Bonnie. How are you?
Good morning. I am coming to you live from the rain-soaked redwoods of Santa Cruz.
Oh, I always wanted to see the redwoods.
Oh, it's beautiful here.
See, that's on my bucket list, to see the redwood forest.
You'll get there.
Yeah. How big are the pine cones? Are they like the size of a Volkswagen?
In Yosemite, perhaps, but where I am, there's not so much pine cones as banana slugs and bobcats, owls, hawks, and ocean waves.
Ocean wave. Oh, I love ocean waves.
Nice.
So are you near the ocean?
Yes, about a mile. And I am just delighted to join you all this morning. This is very exciting for me to have a big book out in Women's History Month. And it's been recommended by Oprah's Book Club as one of the top books to read for Women's History Month. That's just a pleasure for me to see that it has such national appeal, mm-hmm. and I'm hoping that more people like you will see the book as an opportunity to revisit the second wave of feminism and connect it to today's activism.
Yeah, I know. I think there are two things whenever we have change. There's the legal side, the legislation, and then there's the actual implementing of what that legislation is supposed to accomplish. And so far, the legislation may be ahead of the rest of us keeping up with what that was supposed to accomplish. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's always been fair. In the United States, we have a very tragic history of in the 60s implementing reluctantly civil rights laws that were not enforced in many states, whether that was ending school segregation. In some ways, institutions we think of as very conservative were ahead of the population. Truman ordered the military to desegregate in 1948, and so on. But for women, part of the problem is that the changes that have been implemented are often intimate, if you will. And the historian Ruth Rosen made a great comment once that the issues of equality in the women's movement were ones that were brought home to the bedroom and the bathroom and the kitchen, and in these private lived spaces, it's been slower to see enlightenment, let's say. And I think that's why in every generation you often see people most active around relationship issues. And in the case of what's going on now with the Me Too movement, et cetera, a lot of the outcry is still around sexual harassment, sexual violence, disrespect of the body. And we have a long way to go with wage equality, too. But many cycles or waves, whatever you prefer, of feminism have not eliminated rape. And they have not eliminated the fact that many decisions about women's bodies are made by legal groups composed of men. So those are the struggles that resonate with young people today, and they're certainly politically charged. But there's so much more, and I think something that the Academy Awards and other events have been able to do is raise awareness that even the films we see that are fictional about women's lives aren't directed by women. We don't have enough women being awarded for work in cinematography, in the technical jobs of Hollywood. So we really need more women being able to, work in media to bring women's stories forward, and that's part of it.
Yeah, one of the things you struck a chord because we are in media, and
yes.
and I've noticed something in national media that is absolutely unfair. That an old guy can continue, but a woman gets removed and replaced. The Ann Curry story. She's not old and she's very attractive. So I'll never understand the whole Ann Curry story. I mean, she should have been in that seat. No offense to what's her name, Savannah or something like that.
Yeah.
No offense to her, but I think Ann Curry had earned that spot. But I must tell you, though, that you would be proud of our local TV stations.
Okay.
And no offense to these ladies that work in those stations, but they've been there a long time. They're not unattractive, so I don't want anybody to think I'm saying something bad. I'm just saying that in other bigger markets, I think they let them go. But we've had some ladies on TV for as long as I've been here. And,
Exactly.
And the guys, too. But I think... I don't know. It's just one of those things that I've observed.
There are entrepreneurs out there also that have recognized this a few decades ago, because sometimes when businesses are forming, they want to receive grants, they fill out the paperwork. Well, there are grants out there just for businesses owned by women.
Yes. In fact, what's interesting is that women are considered a very good investment globally as well as in the United States. And part of the reason is that where, let's say, microloans and so forth have been made available to women in developing countries, it's with the understanding if you give women funding, it will remain in the community and it will go to support, children and families And sometimes men are more of a risk because they might go drinking with that money or womanizing with that money or gambling with that money. And in very conservative cultures where women are not even encouraged to go out after marriage, they're often a safe bet in terms of being funded for, collective enterprises. And that's certainly been true in India. And these are just interesting aspects of how differently men and women have been able to live public and private. And what we have in the United States is a very public culture for women where there isn't as much, regulation about having to remain in the home. But that doesn't mean that
Thank
all
goodness,
of the issues
right?
well, the problem is that for, at least 100 years, the issue of how you're seen is still percolating. Women are judged by their appearances. There's a lot of anxiety among women of all ages about pursuing what were once men's occupations while looking good as women, and that's part of the issue you just addressed.
Yeah, I think men are also judged by how they appear, but I'm not saying we're the same in that way. I realize what you're saying is true, but I think it's true across the board, and I think it's true across the board for age things too.
Yeah.
I think there's age discrimination on both sides.
Yeah,
as well.
there is.
What do you think we should do about some of the inequities, I guess, that still exist? If I could use the Hollywood movie director, the question I have about the Hollywood movie director thing: if a man directs a movie that makes a really poignant statement about the inequality, the unequal treatment that women have received, why is that a bad thing? I mean, why is it not as,
It's not a bad thing. It's a wonderful thing. The problem is women simply haven't had the same opportunities that men have had. It's obviously terrific when we have, breakthrough films that men have made, and there's a whole lot of guys who are very active on the part of women. In fact, there's guys who don't get enough of a shout-out for their consistent support of women's issues, and one person is actually Stephen King, who's been very attentive to, among other things, funding women's sports at the University of Maine and so on. The main thing is that for a really long time, unions worked hard to keep women out because women were seen as being paid less simply for being female, and therefore they undercut men's wages, and women weren't able to do union work. Many of them had kids and couldn't go out at night to union meetings. So for a lot of reasons, women were unable to break into technical trades like sound and lighting and engineering. So they haven't been as welcome in the behind-the-scenes work of film culture, and they haven't been, invited to major in some of the technical studies that are offered at universities. And in fact, many universities were still closed to women right through my early adolescence. Princeton did not open to women until 1972.
Okay, so that would be the solution to the problem in that category, in that area, because that was going to be my question: is how can we fix that? And it sounds like you don't fix it at the studios. You fix it in the colleges, and you get the women into the places where they are prepared.
Yeah, but also you have the whole issue right now is, it would be great if you could be mentored and get apprenticeships. And if all the generations before you are mostly older guys, the problem for younger women in being apprenticed or mentored is this question of, are you taken advantage of, sexually? And is the climate of, working closely, with a mentor a threat to you? And that's also part of what's being raised. That's a very old issue, and in the Renaissance, women weren't even permitted to become artists because you had to be trained by a master, which meant being alone with a guy you weren't married to in a studio, and that was seen as no better than prostitution.
That was like Mary Cassatt then.
Yes, that's one of my favorite subjects in my Women in Western Civilization class. When people say, where are all the great women artists, if women are, as talented as men? And a lot of them were simply banned from training because it was seen as not modest. And that's still an issue around the world.
And what you're saying applies to authors, too. And while many authors are talented authors and successful authors are women, we've had, Rob and I talk to authors every day, you probably know, and we've had authors on lady authors who don't use their first name. They'll use their initials.
Yes.
That's right.
And I have always wondered, is it because you somehow felt like you would be what do you call it? Hone your edges?
Hone your skills?
Hedge your bet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What it is that people like J.K. Rowling of the Harry Potter books and so forth are actually often encouraged by publishers that if you want to appeal to boys as well as girls, then you make the main character a boy, and you yourself should not be identifiable so that you're pigeonholed into chick lit. And I'm sorry to tell you that even as recently as like 3 or 4 years ago, I have a book called Women's History for Beginners. I went into a Barnes & Noble and asked a young male assistant where I could find my book. I just wanted to pick up a few extra copies as gifts, and he said, "Would that be in chick lit?" Like, boy, that's wrong for so many reasons. So, so that's a perfect example. I mean, here's a serious, history book, and still it's seen as LITE.
Absolutely, and you're right. But on the other hand, a guy who wants to write a romance, I guess I don't. I mean, it seems like two thoughts here. A woman who wants to write whatever chick lit is, I guess that's a romance novel. I mean, she's almost like, oh my gosh, I'm feeding the beast, and I don't want to do that, but I love romance novels. And a guy who wants to write romance novels too, he's feeling like, I don't know if this is going to work. Am I right about my presumption there?
I think you can. I think there's nothing wrong with writing, fun romance novels and so forth. And I think it's more that women have historically used initials or men's names, or they've gone by anonymous, so that their reputation is protected, and various other considerations. Again, throughout much of history, it was considered immodest for a woman to be talked about by people who were not her own family. And there's an old saying, a woman's name should only appear in print 3 times: when she's born, when she's married, and when she dies. And that was a popular expression in the South. And the idea was that if people were talking about you, even if it was good, praise, that's what we call a reputation, and having one is not good.
You had mentioned Shirley Chisholm's presidential run.
Yeah.
Why did not more women and more African Americans rally around her back then? Actually,
a lot did, but I think it's wonderful that you brought that up. It's so important that, in particular, my students remember, Hillary Clinton is not the first woman to run for president. The fact is that we had a female candidate in 1972. And the interesting thing about Chisholm's campaign is that, of course, while she was making an amazing stand, she was not interrogated about her looks, her sexuality, or her marriage the way other females in politics are. The focus on Shirley Chisholm was very much about her race and whether a black woman could represent white concerns. And often, she was adamant that it really wasn't her business to, focus on white people. It was, her business to focus on equality, justice, and, moral issues. But it was perceived that she could only somehow represent the black community, and that intimidated many white voters. And then the fact that she was a female, that primarily convinced many people in the Congressional Black Caucus that she could not win, and therefore she was not the best choice if they wanted to, in this instance, elect a Democrat. But what's fascinating about her is her amazing, brilliant speeches are just, there's nothing like them now. And this is before internet, when if you wanted to, hear more about a candidate, you had to go and watch them. And her means of, rallying people, in particular feminist audiences, love to hear her just lay out the truth. And today we have, candidates who have to be so much more coy or not as blazing. My mother took me to hear Chisholm when I was an 11-year-old girl. She spoke at Duke University, where we were living, and I was very impressed, and you see the result. I became a women's studies professor, and she was great.
The book is really well done. It documents the progress we've made, and even talks about what's going on right now in the world. I have a copy of The Feminist Revolution. If you'd like it, call me. It looks about the size of a record album, I guess, a vinyl record album. It's pretty
amazing.
Big. It's pretty
big.
It's
a nice big coffee table book. It's nice. And it's filled with photographs, posters, images, even pictures of pins right off my college backpack. And we really tried to pack it with images so that everyone could see what some of the great poster art and rallies and marches were like. It feels very recent to me, but to many of my students, it's a good reminder of what women have been doing for years and years and years and years.
The question I have is, were there any notable, and I can think of some, so I'm kind of asking it rhetorically, I guess, but were there any notable, female recording artists, songwriters? I mean, obviously Carole King is one of the greats.
Oh, my goodness.
But I mean, songwriters that forwarded the social awareness of what we need to do.
Yes, there's an entire women's music movement. I am the chief historian and archivist of that movement, so you made me very happy with that question.
Well, real quick, I have said to Robin, Dolly Parton is one of the greatest songwriters, and nobody ever says that.
Well, she's wonderful, but I think it's also really important that people remember the women's music movement that began in 1972, and it included a women-only, women-run recording company, Olivia Records, and Olivia Records produced albums by Meg Christian and Chris Williamson and Linda Tillery and Teresa Trull. And in New York, we had Alex Dobkin. Robin Tyler produced Maxine Feldman's first 45, Amazon Women Rise, which became an anthem for a whole lot of women. This was all going on underground simultaneously with, Helen Reddy's I Am Woman hit in 1973. And a lot of what we called women's music was not played on mainstream radio because it was seen as too radical, too political, and the women wouldn't wear makeup.
You know who you didn't name?
On radio, but still.
I want to tell you one of my lady heroes. It's Janice Ian.
Yeah, oh sure, and I've seen her in concert, and she's cool. Yeah. And there's a lot of women who recorded songs about social justice. Holly Near is very important in this movement. And there were groups like Sweet Honey and the Rock who had turned freedom songs from the civil rights movement.
We need another half hour for this.
Yeah, well, what we call intersectionality was alive and well in bringing issues together through women's music.
Bonnie Morris, thank you so much for doing what you're doing and for taking time to be with us today. I found the book, The Feminist Revolution, on Amazon, and you have a website, BonnieJMorris.com. Is that correct?
Yes. Write to me, and I will write back to you. I am friendly, cheerful, and out there.
And congratulations on your book signing at the Smithsonian.
Oh, nice.
That is going to be wonderful.
Thank you, and happy Women's History Month to Florida.
Fox News Radio, I'm Chris Foster. There's police activity in Pflugerville, Texas, where the man suspected of planting package bombs around Austin lived. He's identified by the Associated Press as Mark Anthony Condit, 24 years old.